Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Ni hao, washe Simon, and that is about all the Chinese I know. Oh no. What I Koskop. Yeah, nice. Thank you. All right, I want to talk about free software licensing basics. So we're gonna take it to a very come in. We're gonna take it to a very basic level at this point. There have been other talks at this venue that I will point you to and other resources. This is a very abbreviated version of a software developer training I usually give, which takes about 2 hours. So I'm gonna focus just on the highlights and want to clear up some misconceptions and some like common pitfalls that we have over there. All right, as I said, and I can do this a little bit quicker probably now. Oh, turn on the mouse, lest it won't work. Yeah, so I'm Simon. Florence already told you I volunteer for the Free Software Foundation Europe. Give this a second. It's interesting how somehow all over the world they use the Big Ben for stuff like that. I volunteer for the Free Software Foundation Europe. We have a booth 2 floors down. So if you have any more questions after this talk that we can't go to, come find me there. I'm also in Taipei until like the end of August. So if you're in a rush right now, we can like connect and set something up. I started my own business recently as a consultant. So that means I mainly help other organizations to solve hard problems. That is what I like to do. Like I'm really interested in like wrapping my brain around things, right? If you have boring problems to solve, there's other people, they will do it probably even cheaper. I like to get into like really complicated issues. Some of these hard problems that I like to get into with other organizations is stuff like, what the heck is this open source? And are we doing this in our company? And once they realize everybody's doing it in their company, it's like, okay, now how can we use this in a secure and compliant manner? So what are the different kinds of things that we need to do in our organization to ensure we are complying with the licenses, we are being good open source citizens, as we say these days, and all of the stuff that is involved with that. I also, one of my focuses is organizational design. So how can we build teams that will leverage free and open source software to create the most value for us and for our users and our communities? So how can we structure software development? What are the things that we can improve there? Both from a for-profit and non-for-profit organizational viewpoint. And also, as has been mentioned, cybersecurity. So how can we improve our software, our system, software architecture to be more secure and resilient? So that is kind of like a walkthrough of all the different kinds of things that I like to do that in the end always boil down to I like to analyze, design, and improve systems, right? Technical and social systems. And if any of you happen to be one of the 5 people that were at my morning talk this morning, you have already heard me talk about social systems. In this specific talk, we're going to focus more about legal systems, right? And what do we do when we talk about software in terms of licensing. The first basic question that I want to tackle there is, why should you even care, right? Like, what is copyright anyway? We're going to talk about the basics of copyright. Then I'm kind of want to rehash, so we're all on the same base. What exactly is free and open source? What does it mean? Where does it come from? What is copyleft? What does that mean? How does that work? And on different parts, like pick up common misconceptions and then point you to some further resources. Alrighty. The reason to care if you are in any way, shape, or form developed with software is very simply, software is work covered under copyright. So it is pretty similar to if you're driving a car, you kind of have to worry about the traffic rights and the traffic laws and all the signs and stuff that go into there, right? So if you are creating software, you cannot really not worry about copyright, unfortunately, because copyright is automatic and it's restrictive by default. So if you create a piece of software almost everywhere around the world, nobody else is allowed to do anything with that software unless you give them explicit permission to do so. And for software, we're going to see this for most of our talks. So we care about two things really from copyright perspective and licensing perspective: the source form that you're developing as a developer, and then the binary form, which is usually like the compiled code that is being distributed to systems and users. And basically what I just said, and what hopefully should be your first point, is you need a license for your software, right? Any kind of license. Any non-licensed code is automatically proprietary code. Very restrictive proprietary code that you have only very, very limited things that you can do if you happen to stumble upon that, right? So that is one of the problems in the past with like code that was just put out on the internet without any license notice, with people thinking, oh, as long as I put it online somewhere, it's open source, right? Unfortunately, that is not the case. If you do not attach a license to it, it's automatically proprietary code. So we need some form of license, and we are here at COSCUP, so hopefully you want to pick a free and open source license. Who here knows about the 4 freedoms and can maybe recite them from their heart? All right. Okay, 3 people. All right, so I'm gonna quickly walk through the very basics of what does free and open source even mean. Okay, so what are we talking about when we throw these words around? Open source, free software. Basically means 2 very important things, right? So we have already established you need to put a license to your software, right? And what most open source things mean very basically is if you give someone a runnable version of your software, so you give it to them and they can run it on their own system, the license will usually require you, or we are talking about an open source license, if you also provide them the source code that fabricated this piece of software and certain rights that go along with it, a minimum set of rights for the user. That is why many organizations these days are shifting their rhetoric to talk about user rights and software freedom. Well, software freedom has been around a long time, but because this is the core of the issue and where it started. So we have 4 basic rights that we worry about in software freedom. The first is the right to simply use it, right? So Freedom 0 says the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. So you would be allowed to install it on your computer. You should be allowed to install it in your car entertainment system, and you should be allowed to install it on your smartphone. That does not mean that the developer is responsible that you technically can do it, right? The piece of software might not run on your smartphone. The point is, the license of the software cannot tell you you can run it on your PC, but you cannot run that same piece of code on a server or on your car entertainment system or wherever else. If you have the technical savviness yourself, the technical capabilities to put it somewhere else, you should be allowed to do that. And on as many devices and for any purposes you want. Second, and of course, we're nerds, so the first freedom is freedom 0, right? We start counting at 0. So the second, or freedom 1, is the freedom to study. So the freedom to study how the program works and change it, right? So access to source code is a prerequisite for this. You need to be able to access the source code that built the software. You should be able to understand it and modify it to fit your purpose. You should be allowed to share the software, right? I don't know how many of you know the song. Join us now and share the software. Look it up. It's a good song. We want the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help other people, right? So very basically, the license cannot restrict you from passing on the software to other people. And finally, we have the freedom to improve, right? And this is where the magic starts to happen of the open source, the share and grow. The freedom to distribute copies of your modified version to other people, right? So we had the freedom to study and change it, and now you create a version 2 of that software and pass it on to other people. And these 4 basic freedoms, this is what open source means, right? Use, study, share, improve. This is if you can read a license and check for these 4 freedoms, you're talking about an open source or free software license. Fortunately, you don't have to do that, right? So if you want to learn about this, and I'm going to out myself as not being a fan of the term war. I use open source and free software interchangeably. I use mostly free software usually because I come from Free Software Foundation Europe, and that is what we use. So I just explained the 4 freedoms as they were put forth by the Free Software Foundation and the GNU project. The open source initiative has their own definition of open source that boils down to 10 rules. But really, what they're doing is being more explicit about certain things. It still comes down to the 4 basic freedoms. So now we have our 4 freedoms. We know, okay, this is open source. This is what we're doing. Fortunately, also you don't have to translate that into licenses, right? So if you are like, okay, that is pretty cool, Simon. I want to pick something and I want to give these rights to my users. There is a whole bunch of pre-existing open source licensing that go from, as the software freedom copyleft advocate would say, very weak and non-interesting licenses that don't do very much for you, to very strong and good licenses that will protect your freedoms very strongly, right? And then this is where it comes in. As a bigger organization, you need to be aware of these different licenses and what goes into them. Right after me, I think Florence is giving a talk about the GPL family specifically, right? So hang on for this if you're more interested in that. I will more cover the basics throughout the rest of this talk. So the other point to take away right at this point is do not write your own license, right? That is one of the most basic recommendations we give these days. There are by now 50 different licenses where both the GNU project, the Free Software Foundation, and the Open Source Initiative agree these are free and open source licenses. There are like 2 or 3 where apparently these 2 organizations don't agree fully, right? Because it's one of them says yes, the other one says no. But they are very exotic licenses. You likely won't have to deal with them. I would definitely recommend not picking any of those if you don't have to. But between the 50 that both of them agree are free and open source licenses, I almost can guarantee you, if you are looking to give your users the 4 freedoms, there is a license in there that you can use that will fit your purpose. Now, at this point, I already want to talk of one of the most basic misconceptions of free and open source software, which is the concept of monetization. So let's assume we have a user over here who has no idea how to write software, but I happen to have some money, right? So I want to pay someone to write software for me. Now, as long as this exchange gives me, as the end user, the 4 freedoms that we talked about, access to the source, and the basic rights of the license, it is under a free and open source license. This is a perfectly valid exchange under any free and open source license out there. So no matter if it's on the very weak side or on the very strong side, all of those allow commercial activities around the use of the software, right? So the distinction whether or not it is a commercial activity or not is not relevant to whether we are talking about free and open source software or not. It is strictly about the license that I receive the piece of software and the rights that go along with it. And I just realized you can't see my mouse if I have it over here. There we are. So that is something to notice. And this is the very, very basic concept of free and open source and the licenses. And then we have the, as I call them, the very strong, the protective ones, right? So what is copyleft exactly? And copyleft as a term is we would call it a legal device to make sure your license has some guarantees in it for people that will do stuff with your software. The most well-known copyleft licenses are the GPL family of licenses. So LGPL, GPL, AGPL. Out of time, I will not get into the big differences between those. I'm going to focus more on what basically copyleft does and says and requires of you. So we talked about the 4 freedoms before, and now the primary thing that a copyleft license requires of you is if you change or modify or redistribute somehow the software that you received under the terms of a copyleft license, you have to make sure on a very basic level that you maintain these software rights if you pass it on. Right? So if you modify the software, if you redistribute the software, give it to someone else, you have to give them the same rights that you yourself received. That is one important thing to note there, one very important word that I said at this stage, which is you have to give the rights to the next person that you distribute the software to. One of the things that many, many organizations misunderstand and fear about copyleft is there is this idea that you have to give back whatever changes you make to the person that you took the software from, right? This giving back to the community. And there is no requirement within any license that you have to give anything back to the original author. There may be very good, even economical reasons to make sure your changes make it back because you want to distribute it more throughout the official channels. But legally speaking, you are perfectly fine to keep your own private modifications, change the software for your own company, keep these changes only within your non-for-profit organization or your school or whatever, and keep them to yourself, right? You can also share to other people and never tell the person you got it from in the first place that you're sharing anything. The important piece is the person you are giving the software to, this person that is receiving the software from you, they have to get the same rights under that license, that same 4 freedoms that you yourself received, right? And they have to apply and comply with these licenses again, right? So it has to travel downstream throughout the life cycle of the project. Now I'm going to talk very shortly about how to pick and apply a license, and then I'm just going to open it up to questions, so we have some time if you have specific questions about specific licenses that we can get to. Basically, the very first question that I post is, or the very first question that you need to pose yourself is, do you want to position yourself on the copyleft side of things or the non-copyleft side of things? And what does that mean? I think the most basic thing I never said about the non-copyleft is, if you release something as free software that is more on the public domain BSD style side of things, and I'm going to talk about specific licenses you can pick for all of these scenarios in a minute. But the difference there is, since they have nothing in there to make sure the next person also has to abide by the 4 freedoms and protect the user rights, they could make a proprietary version of your software. Right? And this is the case and happening a lot in many, many different businesses that are taking open source libraries. Like basically most proprietary software these days has a lot of open source software in it. And if they are licensed under one of the weaker copyleft license, this is something that you as the author of this software explicitly allow them to do. Right? And you might be fine with that. That is your choice. That is completely okay. That is the very first decision that you need to make. So do I want to make sure my software can only be free and open source software forever, as long as it lives, no matter what anybody does to it? Or am I okay with somebody taking it and putting it in their proprietary product? And then I personally like to give or stick with the recommendations that also the GNU project tends to give. And in the very end, I'm going to give you the sources to this talk, so you can read a lot more about it if you want to get into more detail. But basically, there are a couple of recommendations that I like to make. And the very first one is just to be a nice guy if you contribute to a pre-existing project. So if there is already an established project out there, an established community, and they picked a license and you contribute to their project, you put your contribution usually under the license that that project uses as well. Right? So there's no reason usually to start any license wars in communities that you just wanted to participate friendly. If you are doing something that is more akin to a software library, there are 2 questions that you can ask yourself. One of the question is, are you writing a piece of free software that you want to end up in as many places as possible? Right? This is usually the case if you do a reference implementation of an open standard, where even if a proprietary software company will implement this standard, you want them to be able to use your reference implementation and not do their own thing. Right? So standards compliance is a very good reason to decide to use a non-copyleft license, for example. If that is not the case, the LGPL is a very good choice for libraries, and people, there was long the belief that the L would stand for library GPL, which is actually what it says is the lesser GPL. And what it allows someone to do in this case is, if they change the code of the library itself, then that has to stay free and open source software, so the library itself can never be proprietary. But if they only link to the library and use it, basically plug it in to their build system, then they could also do that in a proprietary software. So they can still use the library in their proprietary product. If you don't want them, if you don't want it to end up in any proprietary software ever, then my recommendation for anything else applies, which is basically the best license that is out there, in my opinion, which is the Affero GPL version 3 or later, right? So you want to protect your users to the best possible way. So that is always my go-to recommendation. Unless you really don't want to use a copyleft license, then of course you can also use Apache, right? I recommend the Apache license for non-copyleft work because they did a lot of engineering went into that license to make sure it is, on the one hand, very compatible throughout the place with many different licenses, and also because they have other legal provisions in there for like patent claims and other claims that other licenses just don't have, right? So somebody would not be able to contribute something that they have a patent on to your project and then after the fact sue you for patent infringement, right? Because they have given you a patent license to their patent if it pertains to the software they contribute in their code. And that is my very fast and condensed overview of the different possibilities. If you want to learn more, there are 3 good resources that I want to point you to. One is, and that is where I take a lot of my inspiration to, is go to GNU.org and read about the license and how they were drafted originally, right? There is a lot of inspirational stuff there, a lot of good information there. And I think it's like, if you're interested in free and open source software at all, I just recommend all the articles and essays, or most of them that they have there. They go in a lot of detail also of the history and how it came to be. The Linux Foundation has a free training. You have to register for an account that is called Open Source Licensing Basics for Developers. It's a 2-hour training. It picks up basically all the topics I have had in my talk and goes into more depth. So if you like really have to understand the different licenses and what they mean down to the nitty-gritty, this is a good starting point that I can recommend. And finally, reuse.software. If you have not seen the talk of my colleague Florian this morning, he gave a presentation on reuse, which is a piece of software that the FSFE maintains and provides to help you with applying a license to your project. And that is my answer to, well, how do I apply the license to my project, is use reuse, right? Because it's, there are a lot of things that go into applying a license that it can be unambiguous and understandable by both machine and people, and they do a very good job to walk you through what you need to do and have little tools that will help you and tell you, now do this and now do this, right? And I decided not to give an introduction to reuse at this point because Florian did one, so find the talk on reuse. I think the sessions are being recorded, and they have all the information that you need really online on their website as well. And that is my quick and dirty basic covering of all the open source concepts. Thank you very much. We have our booth at TR312 if you want to talk to me later. And now we're open for questions.
Thank you. Okay, if you have a question later, you can
Yes.
Simon.
I do have a question.
Yes.
About the reuse
Uh-huh.
software. I know this project long time ago from Mattia.
Uh-huh.
So I also know that reuse have been supported by OpenTrain project for a long time ago. So how is this project be used in Europe developers? I mean, it is also for the community, right? So how is the use the situation for the project?
The use case for reuse. So
Yes.
the one sentence explanation is, assume you have a source code repository where a lot of different stuff lives, like binary files, media files, and software, and you run the tool, and the tool tells you, this file does not have a license notice yet.
Yes.
You can tell me what license you want to use, and I will apply it automatically for you, or you can kind of build your own templates, and it just makes sure that every piece in your source code is unambiguously under the license that you want your software to be.
Yes. My question is how many companies or local communities in Europe are already applying the reuse software?
Oh, that I don't know,
Europe?
unfortunately. No,
Okay.
I don't know about usage. I can tell you that I use it and FSFE uses it a lot.
Yeah.
But other than that, cannot tell you, unfortunately.
That's good to know.
I can just mention that it's very well known. Oh, thank you. Reuse is often cited. You know, for instance, you see it on Linux Foundation events and so on. So I think it's like the OpenChain standards. It's completely open to use, so we've no idea who's using it, but a lot of people know about it. So we can probably expect quite a few parties are using it. Yeah. By the way, Simon, thank you. It was a great talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Thank you very much from Europe.